Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Sarasota Nightmare Part 4. Today we're talking about the tragic life of Carly Bershea. While looking for Carly Bershea, police would get a tip from a man named Ed, and he would tell him about a fellow business associate named Joseph Smith. Ed would tell the police that he was pretty damn sure that Joseph Smith was the one that abducted Carly, mainly because of how the man was walking on the CCTV footage. And Ed would tell the police that that's exactly how Joseph Smith walked. The police would investigate into Joseph Smith and would find out that he had a large track record that went as far back as 10 years. Some of those offenses included kidnapping, assaulting women, with a large list of drug offenses as well. He also had a nasty habit of violating his paroles. For example, the last offense that he was currently serving was a drug offense, and he had already violated that parole twice. Police would look into to see what kind of car that Joseph drove, and they would find out that he drove a brown Lincoln. So the cops would go back and looking on the CCTV footage to see if they saw a brown Lincoln around the time that Carly was abducted. The police would not find a brown Lincoln that had belonged to Joseph Smith. However, they did find a very light colored station wagon that would be driving around the area on B Street. They would even see the same station wagon pulling into the car wash within 3 minutes of Carly's abduction. So the police would take the footage of the station wagon from the CCTV footage from the surrounding areas and try to zoom in and break down the camera footage to see if they could get a clear picture to see who was driving. But unfortunately, just like the CCTV footage of Carly's abduction, it was the same as the station wagon. They really couldn't figure out who was behind the wheel. But the police had assumed that whoever was driving this station wagon was probably the person that abducted Carly. But even though Joseph Smith did not have a station wagon, the police still would investigate to see what he knew or if he had an alibi. Now, at the time of the abduction, Joseph Smith had previously been married, but was recently kicked out of his house because he just would never quit his mounting drug problem. And eventually, after being kicked out, Joseph would have to find a room to rent. And he had actually began renting a room off of an elderly married couple called Jeffrey and Mimi Pincus. So the police would see this information and they would go to Jeffrey and Mimi's residence and they would begin knocking on the door, where eventually Joseph Smith would answer. The police would start by showing Joseph the CCTV footage of Carly's abduction. And just like everybody else, Joseph would say the same thing as everyone else had told them. That yes, it did look like him, but that was not him on camera because he had actually been home that Super Bowl Sunday and had spent the entire afternoon with both of his landlords. The police would then ask for permission to not only search his room, but his car. And to their surprise, Joseph would consent and he would say, have a look around, but there's not going to be anything that connects me to this abduction. The police would first start looking in the room of Joseph Smith, and in their investigation in his room, they really would not find anything of significance, other than they found a large selection of mechanic work clothes that he had hanging up in his closet, and they were a dark metallic work uniform. And when they turned the uniforms around, they noticed that the uniforms had a name tag, and the name tag would read Joe. This immediately got the police's attention because the person on camera had a dark metallic work uniform, and they noticed that it had a name tag. And because of the name tag, it had 3 letters. And they knew that this would match the description on the video, but they didn't have anything connecting him to the area. So the police had decided to talk to Joseph's landlord, Mimi Pincus, about his alibi. And when she talked to Mimi, the Mimi would actually confirm Joseph's story, and she would say that Joseph Smith had in fact been at home the entire afternoon on Super Bowl Sunday. And so therefore Joseph Smith was quickly ruled out as a key witness or a person of interest. But however, the police would arrest Joseph Smith that day, because as I said before, they had asked for permission to not only search his room, but also search his car. And they would go inside the brown Lincoln and they would look inside, and to their astonishment, that they would find that the car was filled with needles and spoons and other drug paraphernalia, which would violate his parole a third time. So they would arrest Joseph Smith and take him to jail. The police would then continue with other leads and tips until about 7 p.m. when Joseph's other landlord, Jeffrey Pincus, would pay them a visit. Jeffrey would come to the station and tell the police that he needed to apologize for his wife's behalf, and would tell the police that he was afraid that his wife had actually given the police false information. So the police would take him into the room to ask what he meant. And that is where Jeffrey would tell the police that his wife had dates confused, because on the day of Super Bowl Sunday, she had been babysitting her grandkids and was kind of overwhelmed. And she didn't really have a lot of time to pay attention to their tenant, Joseph Smith. But Jeffrey would say that Joseph was not home at all. He was not at the house the entire afternoon. Jeffrey would also go and say that on the night of the Super Bowl, around 3 p.m., Joseph would approach Jeffrey and ask permission to drive his car, even though he had his own car. But Jeffrey would tell Joseph that it was okay to drive his car, and he would hand him the keys. And at 3 p.m., Joseph Smith would get inside Jeffrey Pincus's light-colored station wagon and drive off. And he would not see him until the following morning, even though Joseph had told Jeffrey that he would only be gone 15 minutes. Jeffrey would also tell the police that before borrowing his station wagon, he would actually clear out the odometer to see how many miles that Joseph would drive when he returned the vehicle. And the following morning, when he returned the station wagon, he would notice that Joseph Smith had driven the car over 300 miles. Jeffrey would even tell the police that when he had his car returned, he had noticed that the car was not in the same condition it was when it was last left, and would tell the police that the car was completely disheveled. Even the back seats were completely folded down, which was not how it was when he had given it to Joseph to borrow. The police had then speculated to themselves that they could now place Joseph Smith at the scene of the crime, because not only did his work uniforms match, but the name tags matched on the CCTV footage, but the car that belonged to Jeffrey Pincus actually was an exact match to the station wagon they had seen on the footage, placing him within 3 minutes of the abduction of Carly. And the police had speculated that the reason the seats was folded down was Joseph Smith had probably folded the seats down in order to hide the body or hide Carly Brochea when he abducted her. And since Joseph Smith was in jail, they would take him from jail to the station to interrogate him. But unfortunately, almost immediately, Joseph Smith would completely shut down, and he would request a lawyer from the moment they began questioning him. And he would not say anything other than request to call his mom or his brother, which they would tell him, you requested to talk to your attorney, so you can't make a phone call unless it's to your attorney. And they would return him to jail. They did have a lot of mounting evidence, but the police would also get another phone call the next following day. And that would actually be from John Smith, Joseph Smith's brother. There, John Smith would give the police a very grim confession. And John would tell the police that after being returned to jail, Joseph Smith would make a phone call to him where he called him on a regular basis. And there, Joseph would tell John that not only was he in fact the guy on the CCTV camera, but he had in fact abducted 11-year-old Carly Brochea. John would tell the police that at the time of the abduction, Joseph was driving around B Street looking for a woman that he could actually assault and rape. And he would actually run into 11-year-old Carly Brochet. And he would say that not only did he assault and kill her, he would also tell the police, "I know where to find her body."